London, England, 1990. A sophisticated robbery involving extensive planning and global connection, organised as a joint venture by the IRA, New York Mafia and Columbian Drug Cartels, resulted in £710 million being stolen from a financial broker. The money was not stolen from a bank or a cash transit van, but rather from a briefcase in the street. That begs the question, how did this syndicate know millions of pounds would be in that briefcase carried by that courier in that location at that exact moment on the 2nd of May, 1990? 5 months earlier, a similar courier working for a different organisation mistakenly dropped £10 million worth of bonds on their way to the Bank of England. A young surveyor picked up the bonds and returned them to the courier's organisation. He was rewarded with a bottle of champagne. Importantly, the press picked up on the story and it hit the newspapers. The organised crime syndicate realised that if they could stage a mugging and collect the bonds, they could quickly launder them through Zurich, pulling off the biggest heist in UK history. It was important that the bonds carried in this briefcase were bearer bonds. This allows whoever holds them to trade them in for cash, effectively making them extremely large denomination banknotes. These certificates were issued weekly by the Bank of England to ensure liquidity was always present in the financial system. After a period of 1 to 6 months, the certificates would have matured and been freely traded for cash. However, if the issuer deduced that the bonds were stolen by an organised group deliberately and not by an opportunistic mugger, they would cancel the bonds, making them worthless and the heist pointless. Early in the working morning, on the 2nd of May 1990, an employee of financial broker Sheppards by the name of John Goddard was walking down Nicholas Lane in central London. In his briefcase were 301 certificates issued by the Bank of England with a cash value of £710 million in 2021. According to Goddard, a young man in his 20s appeared and mugged him with a knife, relieving him of all 301 bearer bonds. The thief, Patrick Thomas, made away with the briefcase. The following day, newspapers reported that the thieves had gathered a worthless haul and they didn't stand to make a penny. This was false information the bank had supplied the newspapers with in order to buy time. The bonds could still be cashed as the organisation had originally intended. However, in a possibly related manner, the connection in Switzerland had backed out of the deal, leaving the gang with 301 certificates they couldn't fence. It was at this point that the New York Mafia became interested, as they were already involved in a separate scheme to launder US bonds in London. The gang contacted Keith Cheeseman, who when told about this heist immediately went to work contacting numerous associates. The bonds were sent to various individuals separately. One of these individuals was Mark Osborne. He was supposed to deliver 10 bonds, each with a value of £1 million, to a mafioso by the name of Tony DiBiono in New York. Unbeknownst to Osborne, DiBiono had been converted to informant for the FBI, and both were arrested immediately. This further complicated the gang's operation as Osborne betrayed them to the authorities. The FBI recorded numerous conversations between Osborne and Cheeseman before Osborne disappeared. The London police, however, were still hopeful that the mugging was not premeditated and that the bonds would be found discarded. It became clear to them shortly after that this was not the case. When bonds began to be recovered, the London syndicate realised a mole had infiltrated their operation. Bonds were recovered in Northern Ireland and NatWest Bank in Glasgow. A number of weeks later, by chance, 80 certificates were recovered during a routine check at Heathrow Airport, and 3 Irishmen were arrested. The men were Thomas Coyle, a known fence, Anthony Rooney and his associate Edward Dunn, who had all been recruited to help sell the bonds. Unable to sell them in Ireland, they had contacted John Francis Conlon, who had numerous connections to arms dealers and agencies in the US, such as the Prince of Marbella. The 3 men would later be acquitted on a technicality. Further raids by the London police recovered 80 million worth of bonds in Cyprus. Other minor raids found bonds in the Netherlands, Scotland, Singapore and West Germany. The link to the Provisional Irish Republican Army was uncovered in September 1990 when US Customs searched a package headed for Lima, Peru. The search revealed £71 million worth of bonds destined for the Columbian drug barons. The bonds were hidden in 2 Miami phone books. The mugger, Patrick Thomas, lived in a council estate with his stepsister and her family, maintaining the appearance of an ordinary life, despite being involved in drug dealing and criminal enterprise. On the morning of the 29th of December 1991, Thomas was involved in a scuffle at the front door and his stepsister found him on the ground deceased as a result of a gunshot wound to the head. The police found Thomas was connected to the robbery when an analysis of multiple building accounts with over £150,000 connected him. A joint effort by both the FBI and the London police connected Keith Cheeseman to the robbery and he was arrested too. He was handed a 6-year sentence but fled the country on bail. Numerous reports had popped up that Cheeseman was found decapitated in Sussex. This was found to be false as Cheeseman was on the run in Tenerife at the time. Cheeseman was once again apprehended and extradited to the US, where he was charged with conspiracy to launder £392 million in stolen bonds. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison after pleading guilty. The police eventually recovered 299 of the bonds. Only Cheeseman was convicted. Numerous unanswered questions still remain. Who murdered Patrick Thomas and why? Where are the remaining 2 bonds? And why was no one else in the syndicate arrested and charged?